I just want to thank you again before I go forward for coming here tonight and enjoying this spirited conversation with us. And I want to touch on one thing up front, and that is this: that when Marvin talks about the problem of evil, he did two things. He talked about a logical problem that we have, which I answered in my rebuttal, and then he talked about personal feelings. I want us to stop for a minute and clear our minds on this issue. Because what we are talking about is not how we feel about the existence of evil. That does not prove that God does or does not exist. What we're talking about here in this context is, do we have good evidence to believe that God exists? Do we have good reason to believe that? Hard feelings go with bad things. Let's just grant that. Nobody's arguing that on any level. But let's set that aside as we answer the question that we're here to debate. Does God exist? Marvin talked about, when he talked about objective morality, a set of rules and which ones and that kind of thing. I want us to stop again for a minute and think about, is there a set of objective values that we can all agree on? And I think there is. And even if we couldn't, even if there are some things, for instance, murdering innocent children, I think we can all agree that that is objectively wrong. Just because there is a gray area does not mean there is a black and a white. As a matter of fact, the black and the white are required to see the gray. And so we can talk about there being different sets of rules in different cultures, but there are some sets of rules that are consistent. And some things we intuitively know absolutely are objectively, morally wrong. I would be amazed if we could find anybody in this room who would honestly say, had they been walking down the streets in Denver and they saw a man raping a woman, that they would simply walk by and do nothing because there are no objective moral values and it's none of our business. And if there is a person like that, shame on you. Objective morality does exist. To say it does not answer the question. In addition, he talked about the subject to change, and objective morality does not change with conditions. That is actually not a good understanding of what objective morality is. We change the principles we apply based on the conditions we're in. That doesn't mean the principles change, that they fluctuate, but the circumstances determine which principles we apply. And so that is just a misunderstanding of what objective morality is. He talked about, he gave a heartfelt story about stealing in King Soopers. And I'm not going to bypass that for sake, because I don't want to deal with it. If you want to ask me a question about it, I'm more happy to answer that. And he also talked about atheists and theists behaving the same. Listen, you need to understand the argument. The argument isn't that those who are theists are better people. That's not the argument. The argument isn't that we're more moral. That's not the argument. The argument is that objective moral values exist, and if objective moral values exist, then God also exists. Not if we all abide by them. I will grant you, I had a neighbor in Minnesota that we lived by, was an atheist. We had all kinds of spirited conversations. And honestly, he did more for helping the poor out and things like that than I did. It's not about how good I am because I am a theist and how bad Marvin is because he is an atheist. That's not the argument. So let's make sure we keep the argument clear and understandable. There was one more thing I wanted to say about that, and I just got to find it here. A list of morals required for survival. So Marvin talked about survival ethics. And here's the problem. Telling the truth, being honest, being moral, doesn't always guarantee survival. As a matter of fact, sometimes it guarantees exactly the opposite. And so we need to consider that in our equation as well. If morals are simply about surviving, then we have missed the boat. As a matter of fact, we have no free will. We are just simply neutrons, electrons, and whatever else is in our body, and a little bit of electricity, and it makes us fire, and we do what our body tells us to do. Our brain fires in a certain way. Our morals are based on evolution and chemistry and nothing more. There is no free will. He talked about the Kalam argument. And he talks about every apple that falls is caused by Allah. I never suggested that, so that's a straw man. He said the Creator could have been the Easter Bunny. Look, if you want to call a timeless, non-physical, super powerful being who created the universe and has a personal, and is personal. If you want to call it the Easter Bunny, call it the Easter Bunny. It sounds a lot like God. But in the end, the Kalam argument does not just end with an ultimate cause. It ends with some things that we understand about that cause. And when I described them, they sounded a lot like God. So you can use whatever term you like. But in the end, the Kalam argument told us a significant amount about God. He said Carl Sagan, he talked about alpha particles and some of the subatomic particles. That is a frontier on science that is still being understood, and to claim that we know anything for sure when it comes to some of those things is probably a little bit presumptuous. The time will tell. In addition, I wanted to quote a couple of people. Let's see if I lost it. I got the wrong piece of paper. Oh, here we go. The famous physicist and atheist Stephen Hawking, in his book, The Nature of Space and Time, says almost everyone knows, or now believes, that the universe and time itself had a beginning. The Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle says the Big Bang model requires the creation of the universe, listen to this, from nothing. From nothing. So the Kalam argument stands. Listen, what we have seen here today is this, that the arguments offered by Marvin are not sufficient to suggest that it is more reasonable to believe that God does not exist. They are not sufficient. The atheistic perspective cannot explain objective morality. And as a matter of fact, Marvin denied it, which again, is, if you recall, is a self-defeating statement. The atheistic perspective can't explain morality, and Marvin had to borrow from a theistic worldview even to make his argument for evil. It cannot explain why there is something rather than nothing. Notice Marvin granted us that everything that has a beginning has a cause. It cannot explain how or why the universe began. As a matter of fact, Marvin tried to explain some theories. He said that the universe is eternal, there's expansion, there's contraction, all these things. But again, remember in my opening arguments, that it is impossible to traverse an actual infinite. There is no actual infinite, and yet that is what Marvin is suggesting. In the end, atheism leaves you empty and alone. A physical being, to be sure, but not a free one. Just a bunch of chemicals mixed with a little electricity, no purpose, no meaning, no morals, no good, no evil, just an accident. The theistic perspective, however, and more specifically, the Christian understanding of the world, can explain these things. The atheist may think that saying God did it is a little simplistic. But God seems to be the perfect word to use when speaking of a timeless, transcendent, non-physical, unimaginably powerful, personal, good cause. The theist says nothing did it. Seeing that these are the only two options, nothing did it or God did it, it seems reasonable to me to believe that God did it. Remember, Marvin granted that everything that has a beginning has a cause. Again, my two arguments were this. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And the other argument was, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values actually do exist. Therefore, God exists. If God does not exist, I believe He does, it would follow not only that He would present Himself in some way, which He has. In addition to showing Himself through nature, He has shown Himself through the person of Jesus Christ. We all recognize evil because we were created as moral beings in the image of God. As I close my remarks, I think the following syllogism will help. If God is all-powerful, He can defeat evil. If God is all-loving and good, He will defeat evil. Therefore, evil will be defeated. This is not an additional proof for God's existence. That is not its intention. It is a suggestion that if you believe God exists, or that He might exist in this way, that He has a plan to conquer evil, and this plan is found in the person of Jesus Christ. Jesus was the ultimate presentation of God Himself, walking among us, sacrificing Himself for us, and rising from the dead, so that we might freely choose to be in a loving relationship